Before we dive into this emotional and heart-touching story, let me ask you something. What would you do if a child stood up and revealed a shocking truth that could change everything? Stay tuned, because today's story will take you on a roller coaster of emotions, courage, and life-changing decisions. But first, let us know in the comments below. Where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from our amazing viewers all around the world. The sun cast its golden light over the beautifully decorated garden, where rows of white chairs lined the aisle, adorned with delicate ribbons and cascading flowers. Laughter echoed softly in the breeze, mingling with the gentle strains of a string quartet playing in the background. The atmosphere was one of celebration and joy, as friends and family gathered to witness the union of James and Emily, a seemingly perfect couple. 8-year-old Ethan sat in the front row, his small frame swallowed by his neatly pressed suit. He clutched a crumpled napkin in his hands, his fingers twisting it nervously. The boy's bright eyes, usually filled with curiosity and mischief, were clouded with worry. He glanced toward his father, James, who stood at the altar, looking dashing in his tailored suit. James's face radiated happiness as he exchanged a loving smile with Emily, who stood beside him in an elegant white gown. To the world, Emily was a vision of grace and charm. Her laughter was warm, her smile captivating. Guests whispered admiringly about how lucky James was to have found her after years of being a single father. But Ethan knew a truth that no one else did, a truth that gnawed at his young heart with a weight far too heavy for his age to bear. For weeks, Ethan had been living in quiet torment, enduring Emily's sharp words and cold demeanor when no one else was around. She had perfected the art of masking her true self, presenting a facade of kindness and affection in public while unleashing her cruelty in private. She would scold him for the smallest mistakes, call him names that stung worse than any scrape on the playground, and worst of all, she threatened him. "Your dad will never believe you," she had hissed one night when Ethan had mustered the courage to protest. Her eyes, which appeared warm and inviting to others, burned with a chilling intensity. "If you say anything, I'll make sure you regret it." Ethan had wanted to believe her words were empty threats, but fear paralyzed him every time he thought of speaking up. How could he ruin his father's happiness? James had always been his hero, the kind of dad who read him bedtime stories in silly voices and built forts out of blankets on rainy days. James had found love again, and Ethan didn't want to be the reason it all fell apart. But as the wedding day approached, Ethan's unease grew unbearable. The moments of mistreatment had piled up, and the weight of silence felt like it might crush him. He knew deep down that if he didn't speak now, he might lose the chance to protect not just himself, but also his father from a future filled with pain and lies. Now, as the ceremony began, Ethan felt his pulse quicken. His small hands trembled, his mouth went dry, and the crumpled napkin in his grip began to tear. He looked around at the smiling faces of the guests, who had no idea of the storm brewing inside him. He glanced back at his father, whose happiness was so genuine, so pure, that it broke Ethan's heart. The officiant's voice rang out, drawing Ethan's attention back to the altar. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was his moment. The words hung in the air, heavy and expectant. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, though no one yet turned to him. Tears pricked his eyes as he clutched the napkin tighter. He could feel the fear rising in his chest like a tidal wave, but beneath it was something stronger, a fierce determination to protect his father. With a deep breath, Ethan stood up. His small voice, shaky but resolute, cut through the silence like a blade. "I do." The entire room froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the little boy standing bravely in the front row. Even the birds seemed to quiet their songs, as an almost palpable tension settled over the crowd. James's smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. Emily's face, so radiant just moments ago, twisted briefly into an expression of shock before she quickly masked it with a concerned smile. "Ethan," James said gently, stepping toward him. "What's wrong, buddy?" Ethan's chest heaved as he fought back tears. His small fists were clenched at his sides, his voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Emily. She's not who you think she is." Gasps rippled through the crowd as murmurs began to spread. James crouched down, his eyes locking with Ethan's, full of concern and confusion. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" Ethan's lips quivered, but he didn't waver. He took a step closer to his father, his voice steadying with each word. "She's been mean to me, Dad. When you're not around, she says horrible things. She makes me feel like I don't belong." The room erupted in whispers, the once celebratory atmosphere now thick with shock and disbelief. James looked at Emily, whose carefully crafted smile was starting to crack. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan wasn't finished. "And I have proof," he said, pulling out a small tablet from his pocket. The guests watched in stunned silence as Ethan unlocked the device and pressed play. The room filled with Emily's harsh voice, unmistakable and dripping with venom. "You're just a spoiled little brat," the recording played, "and your dad only keeps you around because he feels guilty. If it were up to me, you'd be out of the picture." James's face turned ashen. Emily's composure shattered as she tried to stammer an explanation, but the damage was done. Ethan stood there, tears streaming down his face as his father's expression shifted from disbelief to heartbreak. "Ethan," James whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He pulled his son into a tight embrace, holding him as if he were the most precious thing in the world. The weight of the truth had been unleashed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The garden, once filled with laughter and light, now felt like a storm had descended. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd as the recording played, Emily's venomous words reverberating off the floral archways. The guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, their faces a mixture of disbelief, pity, and anger. James remained kneeling, holding Ethan tightly in his arms. The boy's small body trembled as he buried his face in his father's shoulder, tears soaking into the fabric of James's suit. James stroked Ethan's hair gently, his mind spinning with the weight of what he had just heard. "Ethan," James said softly, pulling back to look his son in the eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ethan sniffled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared, Dad. She said you wouldn't believe me, that you'd be mad." James's heart broke in ways he didn't think possible. The guilt hit him like a freight train. How had he not noticed? How had he let his son endure this alone? He kissed the top of Ethan's head, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, buddy." I should have seen it. I should have protected you." Standing up, James turned to Emily. His face, once filled with joy and love, was now etched with betrayal and fury. "Is it true?" he demanded, his voice louder now, echoing across the silent crowd. Emily's face flushed red as she fumbled for words, her once poised demeanor crumbling. "James, please. It's not what it sounds like. He's just a child. You know how kids can exaggerate." "Exaggerate?" James interrupted, his voice rising with anger. He pointed toward the tablet still in Ethan's hand. "That wasn't exaggeration, Emily. That was cruelty. That was abuse. And it's not just what he said. It's how he's been acting. He's been scared, nervous, and withdrawn. I didn't want to see it, but now I can't unsee it." Emily's eyes darted around the crowd, searching for support, but all she found were faces filled with judgment and disgust. The once friendly guests, who had toasted to her happiness, were now whispering harshly, their trust in her shattered. "James, I love you," Emily pleaded, stepping toward him. Her voice cracked with desperation. "I didn't mean any of it. I was just frustrated. It was hard adjusting to being a stepmom. You have to understand." "Understand?" James's voice broke. He held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "What I understand is that you hurt my son. You manipulated him, made him feel unsafe in his own home. And you hid it all behind a smile while I was too blind to see it. I will never forgive you for that." Emily's expression twisted, her desperation turning into anger. "You're really going to throw everything away because of a little misunderstanding?" she snapped. "Do you think anyone else will love you the way I do? Do you really want to be a single father forever?" James took a deep breath, his anger giving way to a calm, resolute strength. "I'd rather be alone than with someone who hurts the people I love most. You showed me exactly who you are today, Emily, and I'll never let you near my son again." Without another word, James turned to the officiant. "This wedding is over," he announced firmly. The officiant nodded, stepping back as murmurs spread through the crowd. Emily stood frozen, her face pale, as James signaled to one of the ushers to escort her away. She protested, her voice rising in anger, but no one came to her defense. As Emily was led out of the venue, James pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Hello," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I need to report a case of child abuse. I have evidence that my fiancée has been mistreating my son." Ethan looked up at his father with wide eyes as James hung up the phone. "Dad, are you mad at me?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling. James knelt down again, holding Ethan's face in his hands. "Mad at you? Never," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You're the bravest person I know, Ethan. You did the right thing. You protected us both. I'm so proud of you." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. The crowd began to disperse, many guests stopping to offer James their support or to give Ethan a kind word. A few stayed behind to help clean up the venue, their hearts heavy with the events of the day. The weeks following the wedding were a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and change. Emily's departure left a void, but it also brought a sense of relief to both James and Ethan. For the first time in months, their home felt like a sanctuary again, a place where love and trust could flourish without the shadow of fear or deceit. James dedicated himself to helping Ethan heal from the ordeal. He immediately enrolled Ethan in therapy, knowing that it was crucial for his son to process everything he had endured. On their first visit, Ethan hesitated, clinging to James's hand as they walked into the cozy, brightly lit office. "Will it really help?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James knelt beside him, his eyes filled with reassurance. "I think it will, buddy, and I'll be with you every step of the way." The therapy sessions became a turning point for Ethan. Week by week, he opened up about his fears, his pain, and the courage it took to stand up that day. His therapist, a kind woman with a gentle voice, helped him understand that none of it was his fault. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to find his confidence again. While Ethan was working on healing, James was on a journey of his own. He replayed every moment of his relationship with Emily in his mind, searching for the red flags he had missed. The guilt weighed heavily on him, but he refused to let it consume him. One evening, after tucking Ethan into bed, James sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a photograph of the two of them from happier times. "I'll do better for you, Ethan," he whispered to himself. "I promise." James joined a support group for single parents, finding solace in the shared experiences of others who had faced similar challenges. He learned to forgive himself, to accept that mistakes didn't define him, and to focus on the most important thing in his life, his son. Months turned into a year, and the changes were remarkable. Ethan smiled more, laughed more, and even started taking up hobbies he had once loved, like drawing and soccer. James became more present than ever, attending every game, cheering louder than anyone in the crowd, and always making time for their one-on-one dad and son nights. One afternoon, as they sat in the park sharing an ice cream cone, Ethan looked up at James. "Dad, do you think I'll ever forget what happened?" James took a moment to think, his gaze soft as he looked at his son. "I don't think you'll forget, Ethan, but I do think you'll grow stronger because of it. You've already shown me how brave you are, and no matter what, you'll never face anything alone again. I promise." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't need to say anything else. He knew his dad meant every word. One evening, as James and Ethan sat on the couch flipping through an old photo album, Ethan paused on a picture of his mom, who had passed away when he was just a baby. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with curiosity. James's heart clenched, but he smiled. "I know she would be. She'd be so proud of how strong you are, Ethan. And I think she'd be proud of me, too, for being the dad you deserve." They sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of their bond filling the room. Ethan and James's story is a testament to the power of love, courage, and resilience. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward, and that the truth, no matter how difficult, can set us free. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Brilliance for more emotional and inspiring tales. Together, let's continue to celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.